We have this evening 3 very special and unique women, in my opinion. We have a curator-gallerist, we have an art advisor, and we have a fine arts photographer. So it's a nice range of people to hear from. And one of the things that they have in common is that they've reasonably currently pivoted from other careers. So we're going to get started meeting them. We have Genevieve Williams, Lindsay Herron, and Taylor O'Sullivan. So you've met me, I'm Raffaella, this is Fiorenza. We sent all those emails and we're grateful that you responded, but with no further information from me, we're going to get started. We're going to ask, can you tell us how you started on the path that you're on now and why you pivoted to what you're doing? So it's all yours.
All right. I'll lead the charge here. So yes, I am Genevieve. I have had a career in the arts for about 15 years or so, with varied working between the commercial industry and the non-profit sector. So I moved from Australia about 10 years ago and ended up becoming the director for a local gallery here in town, Peter Blake Gallery. So I was his director for 7 years, and during that time, every year we would do about 9 art fairs across the US, as well as about 7 exhibitions at the gallery. So throughout my career, I would say I've organised over 150 exhibitions in the US, Australia, and Europe. In the last couple of years, I pivoted from that role with Peter, and I had my baby girl, I had maternity leave, and then I stepped into a new role as the director and curator for a non-profit art foundation, again here in town, called the Honecker Foundation, and I think I've had the good fortune of meeting a lot of you through that, so very pleased to be reconnected. And then, the foundation unfortunately got put on hold kind of December last year, and that left me with the space of going, what's the next step for me? And while I was with the foundation and things were kind of being put on hold, we were talking about doing pop-up programming, and this is one of the spaces that I was looking at. It was vacant. It was previously being used as a vehicle showroom. So when the foundation got put on hold, I had this space in mind, and during the day, with the windows on both sides, it is a spectacular space. The natural light in here, the openness, obviously location, it just doesn't get any better. So honestly, this space itself was what sparked the idea of me opening my own gallery. So I've opened GW Contemporary end of July, so it's now month 4. And I've returned to my previous experience working in a commercial art gallery, but I'm now the owner. So that's my little story.
Hello. Ooh, okay, testing that out. It's a bit of a long story, but I will try and keep it brief. But becoming an art advisor was a massive career shift for me that I made about 3 years ago out of pure love and passion through my own experience in collecting and attending art shows and fairs. But I spent about 14 years working in advertising sales. Prior to making this shift, I was a senior director at Amazon, overseeing the Disney portfolio of business. But in my free time, and when I did well at work, I found myself just really gravitating towards artwork. And I'd go to art shows and meet artists, and I was just so engaged in these conversations. But to back up a little bit, I think what initially kind of got me hooked on just the power of art was probably about 7 years before that. I didn't grow up in a household that necessarily placed a lot of value on art. From my perspective, it was sort of viewed as a bit of a frivolous thing or expenditure. And I think, so there, years ago, my older sister was tragically killed in a car accident. But the reason I share this story is because every year with my family, we would go to Park City, Utah, and there are many, many art galleries there, and I loved going into the galleries and seeing the artwork. And I remember going into this gallery and I saw this piece of art. It was abstract, it was really colorful, it was bright and vibrant. And I turned to my fiance at the time and I said, this piece of art just really makes me think of my sister, and it brings me a lot of joy. And it just sort of was the first time I felt this like emotive connection and experience with art. And this was long before I ever knew or thought I'd end up on this career path. And then a couple months later, it was my sister's birthday, which is in February, and this massive package arrived at the door. And I was like, what is this? And my husband had purchased the piece of art. And my initial reaction, I was like, oh no, like, how much did it cost? Like, I was so nervous because I was someone who'd go in looking but never thought to say to the gallerist, hey, how much does this piece of art cost? I found the experience to be a little bit intimidating. So, you know, and I'll share the cost of the piece. It was a pretty sizable piece, but I think it was $3,500. And I was like, oh, that's okay. That's within striking distance. And I think I said, don't tell my parents. But after that, I was hooked. That was sort of the thing that turned me on to going to art fairs, talking to artists, meeting with them. And this was really from the perspective of just it being a passion and a hobby. But then as I did better and better in my career in advertising, I said, well, I could care less about handbags or these things, but I kept finding little pieces of art that were meaningful to me. And it just transformed so much. And over time, I had friends start asking me, hey, like, I want to find something. Can you help me? So it happened sort of organically. But the other piece was that I thought that in my own experience of collecting art, you see things in the same context often, whether you're looking at things digitally or in a gallery space. And I liked this concept of contextualizing the art viewing experience. My husband and I have a house out in Joshua Tree, and it sort of feels like you're inside the national park. It's surrounded by these big boulders, and I had we'd have people come and stay, and they'd say, where's this ceramic piece from, and like, where's the bedding from? And I thought it would be interesting to curate the home with art and have it kind of exist as this living, breathing space where people could come and stay, and if they liked the art, they could purchase the art. So I initially partnered with an artist, and we did a show out of the home. And at the same time, I started art consulting and advising, and it gave me enough confidence to leave Amazon, and I've never looked back. And I love connecting with people. I think that's why I was in sales initially. I have a curiosity about people, and I've experienced the emotive power of art, and it brings me immense joy to help people navigate their own experience in the art world. So understanding the complexities of it, but most importantly, discovery. And it's not about my taste, but it's about your taste or my client's taste. And that's sort of what got me on this path. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but it's kind of a long story.
Hi there. Oh, I'm Taylor O'Sullivan. It's so nice to be here with all of you. My career began similar to these gals about 15 years ago, and I actually worked in the film industry for the last 15 years behind the camera as a cinematographer. And I actually got into filmmaking when I was very, very young. It was an accident. I was enrolled in a choir class when I was a freshman in high school, and I have a horrific singing voice. So I went to my guidance counselor and I just begged her to put me in anything other than choir. And lucky for me, the only elective that was left over was a film and broadcast journalism class. So when I was just 13, I learned how to shoot and edit and lighting. And I was just completely intoxicated by the entire experience. And I knew at that very early age that I wanted to commit my life to the arts and to storytelling through film initially. And I went to film school at Chapman University, which was where I took my first film photography class. Woo! Amazing film program. And what Chapman did really well was they really encouraged and cultivated the idea of being a global citizen, and they encouraged students to go out into the world while we were in film school to both make documentaries and movies. And we have another fellow Panther film school here. And when I was 18, I was part of a scholarship program, and they took a group of students to Cameroon, Africa, and we got to make short documentary films in service of nonprofit organizations. And I felt like this was just the nexus of everything that I loved and cared about. It was narrative storytelling for a cause. It was being out in the world and connecting with people. And I just absolutely loved it. And so when I went along making this film, I also brought a little tiny camera with me. It was just this little dinky Canon, nothing special. But when I got back, I put all of the photos together and I printed a photo book. And it was the first time that I had ever seen anything that I had made in a printed form. And I really loved it, but it actually took about another 20 years before I would eventually do that again. And so I went to work on lots of movies and television shows, big movies, small movies, the person getting coffee for the producer's assistant, all the way up to, the producer running the show over the course of several years. And what I really loved about filmmaking was the ability to connect with stories. And what I really loved specifically was documentary film, because I felt like it was such an amazing challenge to really only work within the confines of reality. So in narrative storytelling and big movies, we bring in all the set dressing, we bring in the wardrobe, we bring in all the elements, and there's a certain element of control, which can be really interesting and a lot of creative expression. But what I was always drawn to was actually, how can I work within the confines of reality? So utilizing natural light, working in documentary and saying, how can I make the most beautiful image, or how can I make the most beautiful story given the actual nature of reality? And so over the course of my career, I was very grateful to be able to travel to about 60 countries in 10 or so years. Documentary was an incredible vehicle to really see the world and to have just absolutely wild and unique experiences that I never could have really fathomed. And it was such a rewarding career. But what I noticed was that when I first started 10 or 15 years ago, the attention spans of audiences was significant. People would sit down in their seats for 2 hours and they would watch your film or they would watch your documentary. But I think the internet rapidly changed everyone's attention spans. And so I found that over the course of several years, clients that used to ask me to make these really meaty, long-form stories, they got shorter and shorter and shorter. And I felt like I creatively needed to be satiated in a way that had more legs and that had more longevity. And so as the internet ramped up and social media made everything micro, almost in a revolt of that, I felt like I creatively needed to see something that I cared about immortalized on the wall for 10 years. Instead of 10 seconds on your phone or 5 seconds on your laptop screen, I really wanted to see something that I cared about for a very long time. And so when we moved to our place here in Laguna, I printed a couple of the 35 millimeter works that I had shot while I was out in the field and hung them on the wall in our home, and I just absolutely loved the way that it felt, and it kind of brought up that feeling that I actually felt all those years back when I was 18 about seeing something that I made in print. And that was kind of it. I took a step back, I saw it on the wall, and I kind of saw the whole thing flash in front of me. I was like, oh my God, I love the way this feels. I'm gonna have to open a gallery and I'm gonna have to quit film. And that was a year and a half ago. And so that's exactly what transpired, and Jen very generously invited me to share this space, and so for the last 4 months, we've been here, Colterra, which is my gallery, and GW, Contemporary and Unison, and it's just been an absolutely immense experience.
I would like to ask Genevieve if she could describe the process to determine which artists you like to bring to your gallery and to showcase here.
So look, I think when I was thinking about opening the gallery, it's obviously a daunting decision because it becomes my voice. I think previously in my career, I was always directing other people's spaces. So when I was thinking about opening my own gallery, especially here in Laguna Beach in Orange County, I was very mindful of thinking about which artists I wanted to show and the types of exhibitions I wanted to put on. So for my inaugural exhibition, which was July through, I'm losing track of time, September, I think, October, I had 11 artists from all across the world. And they were it was a very minimal abstract show. And I would say it was heavily influenced by the California Light and Space movement, which was something I had specialised in for the last 10 years, but it was kind of that next generation of artists. So for that first show, I actually had a mix of established artists. So I actually had some of the California Light and Space. I had Laddie John Dill, I had Gary Lang, and I had Larry Bell. And then alongside those historic artists, I had younger emerging artists. From Australia, from the Netherlands, from Denmark. So it was a really interesting show in terms of being able to see how generations of artists have been influenced by the same kind of concepts and ideas. And it's also interesting just to be able to, in terms of collectors coming through the door, be able to cater to those more seasoned collectors who are looking for those established artists, but also start bringing in that next generation of collectors by having emerging artists, younger artists that are a more accessible price point. So yeah, in terms of thinking about artists, I truly can't go against my intuition. I can only show artists that I love. I'm constantly online. I think the internet has its curses in terms of our attention span, but there's also a blessing in terms of the reach and it truly is a global market. So it feels like a dirty thing to say, but Instagram is a fantastic tool. So Instagram is kind of a source of inspiration for me. I'm always coming across new work, new artists. And as I've started this gallery program, that's been a big point of outreach for me. I'll actually contact artists and just start a dialogue, and then you hop on a phone call or FaceTime or email exchange and you go from there. But yeah, I think I feel very passionately about bringing art and artists to Orange County that aren't here, doing programming that's a little bit different. I want to bring art here that I have always had to travel to go and see. So I've always had to go to New York or to Sydney or to LA to see a lot of these artists. So it's exciting for me to bring that programming here to Orange County and kind of fill that gap in the market, I suppose. So did that answer the question? Okay.
Thank you, Genevieve. For Lindsay, we were wondering if you could describe how you assess a client's needs and interests. Like, how do you uncover their tastes, their goals? How do you begin working with a new client? And what does your sourcing process look like from discovery to installation? Do you want me to repeat that? Did everyone hear that?
Okay. I think I got it all, but let me know if I missed something. And I'm also very grateful that Genevieve, when she was saying I used to have to go to New York or to these different places to see these artists, with the initial opening, I was just like, yes, thank you. We have worked together already. Yes, we have, which has been wonderful. So in terms of how I like to work with clients, I like to get to know my clients on a very personal basis and level. I like to know where they like to travel, what brings them joy, what gives them the physical feeling of happiness. For me, that's when I'm hiking or when I'm in nature, where they grew up, what they do for work. It's such a personal experience. And what I do is very concierge in the sense of it's not just about, okay, I'm going to, educate you on the value of this piece and why I recommend the artwork, but it really starts with you, with the person, with the collector. And to share an example of that, I am working with a client right now who she's in her 70s, but she was a fashion model in her 20s, and she didn't know a lot about art, but knew that she wanted to have some really beautiful, meaningful pieces in her home. But the thing that gets really excited is fashion and clothing. And a lot of the artworks that I sourced and recommended for her home were by artists who take a lot of inspiration from fashion design. One of the artists, he initially, when he moved here from Vietnam, he worked in fashion design and didn't speak any English, and artwork really became his form of expression, which is back to that emotive piece that I love about art. And part of his process is that he takes silk and he individually hand tears strips of silk, dips it into paint, and then attaches it to a canvas. And then the canvas is undulated. It's essentially sculpted on site and has so much movement and depth in it. And that process was really influenced by working in fashion. So this was a story that I shared with my client, and she loved the piece. And that's a little bit of just an insight into how I think about pieces I pull for a client. I'm thinking about, of course, the space and where is it going to live and how is that going to feel cohesive with everything else that's happening in the room. But most importantly, I think this is the big difference between decorative art and fine art is the emotive power of it. So, there's another client who spent summers growing up in Lake Michigan and had this really strong emotional connection to Lake Michigan. There's an artist whose work I thought they would like based on our discovery process, which I will mention. But part of this artist process is that he paints layers and layers of acrylic paint and watercolor onto Italian linen, and then he takes that canvas and he attaches it to the back of his boat and he drags it through Lake Michigan or the Pacific Ocean. So the client had already liked the piece, and then this was something, these little things that people share with me, I just sort of make these mental notes, and it inspires me. So that's sort of a little bit of insight into the sourcing. I do have a client intake form, which is an opportunity for someone to share with me anything that we may have missed in an initial conversation. I also, because I think it's hard for people to describe what they like when they're looking at art, or they're like, I don't know, I'm not sure where to start or how to, I don't know what I'm looking for. So based on an initial conversation, I like to pull this big digital gallery. It's like a scroll, a big digital gallery, and I'll pull a bunch of different pieces and mediums and styles, and I share this with my client, and I say, this is a creative exercise. Don't overthink it. This is meant for you to look at this, and I want to know what you like. I want to know what you hate, and it's almost like pinning these little moments. So I start there, and that gives me an indicator of the direction I want to go and what pieces I want to pull. So that's sort of phase one, and then we set up a meeting, and I will walk the client through a few pieces, 2 to 3 for each space, and really deep dive into who the artist is, the story, the process, as well as my recommendation behind the value of it. And when I'm thinking about value and longevity, I am looking at things like, who is the artist represented by? Are they showing at art fairs? What does the sell-through look like for their shows? There's a lot that goes into that evaluation for me and recommendation, and that depends on if we're looking at emerging artists or mid-career artists. But I spend a lot of time researching and tracking, and depending on the investment level, I'm paying attention to things like, is there relevancy in terms of pop culture, for example? There's an art, and do they have any pieces that have exhibited with institutions, or are they in any permanent collections and institutions? I think there's a lot that goes into the mix, and I think it's fascinating. So does that, what else was on that list? Does that answer the question? Okay, I can't remember what else there was, but yeah.
So I would like for Taylor, like we were here the other day, and she explained a little bit her process of going and traveling and finding spaces for her photography. So could you please go over that again with our audience? Thanks. About this.
Thank you. The process has changed over the last 5 years pretty significantly. As I mentioned previously, photography was the thing that I always did just because I loved it, whereas filmmaking was really my career. And so the way that the initial collection, when I started this last summer, I released my first collection, and that collection was comprised of images from the last really 15 years of traveling to about 60 countries. But those shoots were generally, it was film first, and if I had maybe an hour before my call time, or I could stick around for an extra day or two in some remote place by myself, then I would take, a couple days of stills. But the subject matter was deeply motivated just based on where I happened to be. And again, working in documentary allows for such incredible experiences in bizarre and remote places. And so the first collection was really motivated by where was I already, and being able to find those small moments, whether it was street photography or shots in nature. And the way that it has changed is very significant, because the collection that you'll see hanging now in the gallery, this is the second collection that I released. How long have we been here? 4 months? It's all a blur. That I released 4 months ago, because energetically this collection is very different, because it was the first time that I actually went out into the world to create art. And that was a really special experience. And I have to say, I was a little nervous when I set out, because I had 15 years of an archive to pull from. And that's kind of an easy thing to do. Over the course of 15 years, you're bound to make a couple greatest hits. And so the first collection I felt was a very easeful experience, being able to pull from all these different places and curate something that felt cohesive, that I was proud of. But there was infinite time to create it and to curate. Whereas with this collection, I implored myself to create something in less than about 3 months' time. And as you've seen, all of the works are from all over the world. I shoot occasionally locally, but generally I'm attracted to destinations that are far away. And so I set out, and this collection was shot in Italy, Albania, Greece, Japan, and in Laguna Beach. And the whole idea for this new collection was the same idea that I wanted to infuse into the first collection, which is a sense of reverence for nature. And that is the through line that you'll see through all these pieces. The idea of highlighting these small aspects of nature, or sometimes what I call underappreciated aspects of nature that I think are so beautiful. Like a close-up of this. This is a stone, a volcanic stone in Greece. And so I knew after releasing the first collection, I knew the shots that I felt most excited to share. I also, from having a 3-month solo show, I got a lot of feedback about which pieces people really felt drawn to and which pieces resonated. And some of the favorite pieces were close-ups of lichen on 35 millimeter film, close-ups of mushrooms. And so I felt pretty clear, honestly, when I made the first collection. I was like, these are my favorites. I think other people are going to love these too. And I was very pleased that they did. And so it felt very natural when thinking about what am I going to create for this second collection to lean into the things that I love and that also really had resonated with people. And so with this second collection, I got to set out and say, okay, what do I want to shoot? Where is it going to be? And with photography, and this type of photography specifically, it is a very slow, and I would almost describe it as a meditative process. When I'm out in the field shooting, it is like when I am my truest self. I pretty much go dark from all other aspects of my life. I kind of check out, and I'm very, very focused on just this one thing. And it's a level of presence that I don't experience in my day-to-day life. And so I love being out in the world shooting. But the most important thing is that you make no plans. There can be very little plans, because the best shots I have found come from when you're very open and you are open to what presents itself organically. And so that might be physically finding a location and realizing that the light would be better the next day and you want to come back. You can't have a firm schedule, no plane tickets, none of it. You have to be super, super open. And so my very patient husband, who's here, I said, we've got 6 weeks. We're going to fly into Albania and hike a mountain, and then we'll just see what happens. And so there's a shot over here. You'll see these white, almost looks like linen or coral, but that's actually the underside of a king oyster mushroom. And I had done enough research, and I figured, okay, I think at this time of year, September, in Albania, at this elevation in the Balkan Alps, which is just a very random and remote part of the world, I'll be able to find these king oyster mushrooms. And so we booked a one-way ticket to Albania, and we had to hike for about 7 hours up a mountain before we finally found that mushroom. I was starting to get nervous. I was like, oh my God, where is this mushroom? And so this whole scene, by the way, is probably about 2 to 3 inches wide, and I think it's a perfect representation of my intention behind what I love to highlight, which is that if we slow down and we actually, we get off of our phones and we're present with our surroundings, that there's so much beauty in nature and in reality around us all of the time. That is the intention. That's why this gallery is here, is to remind people that. And so I wanted to focus on these little vignettes in nature, like mushrooms and interesting rock formations, undulation of the ocean. And so we had to just remain very open to what presented itself. And actually, the day after I photographed those mushrooms, it started to snow. And so we had to quickly pivot. We were like, we got to get out of here. We got to go somewhere warm. We're wearing T-shirts and shorts. And so we looked at a map of Europe, and the whole of Europe was under a rain cloud last summer. The only dry place was Greece. And so we booked a flight the next day, and then ended up just about 40% of this collection ended up being shot in Greece because it was, ultimately it was the only dry place in Europe. And we totally fell in love with so many of these landscapes. And some of my favorite shots actually ended up coming from Greece, and we did not know that we were going to go to Greece. So I have a very clear vision for, it's almost like I can picture a collection before it's actually shot. I know generally what it looks like, what colors, what tones, what textures, and also what intention I'm hoping to communicate with the collection. But I never know going into it what I'm going to find, and I think that's what makes it really special, and it's also what makes it really fun. Because at the end of the day, creating art should be fun. And when I'm in the field and I get to be really present, that's how I feel. And I've gotten some feedback from people when they come in. They talk a lot about energy and the way that a photo, unlike other mediums of art, makes somebody feel. And as somebody said it, they were like, God, I just feel so much joy from this scene. And I'm like, I'm so delighted that you feel that, because that's how I felt when I created it. So I think locations are much less for me about logistics, and I think sometimes people can perceive photography to be a lot about control and the light, and it can be very scientific in a lot of ways. But for me, it's actually mostly about feeling, and it's more about intuition than the technical aspect of photography.
Okay. I'd love to share with you all that in September, Genevieve was recognized as an emergent art leader in Orange County. So congratulations to her. We look forward to your leadership for all of us. In your acceptance speech, you mentioned that we're in a moment of like a generational shift, and there's a new wave of artists, a new style of curation. I wanted you to expand on that statement, if you don't mind, because I didn't have the privilege of being there that night, and I don't know if any of you were, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a huge honour, and I can't believe that was only a couple of months ago. Again, it's been a whirlwind of a year. But yeah, I sincerely think we are at a very interesting point in time. We're in this kind of transitional stage where that next generation is coming through, whether it's the next generation of artists or curators or gallerists. I think back in July or May, June, when I was thinking about opening this space, the main conversation that I was having with a lot of people were like, oh, are you sure you want to open a gallery? Like, a lot of galleries are closing. But I actually think that's, again, indicative of this transition that's happening. I think it's time for the next people to take the reins and to maybe try and do it a little differently. I think in terms of just speaking about owning a gallery and running a gallery, I think that traditional gallery model is not thriving and surviving the way that it used to. So that was something I was very mindful of when I was thinking about opening this space and how I was going to run it. And I think for me, a big part of what I'm doing here is about collaboration. So it's about collaborating with my peers, and I've worked, obviously Taylor is sharing the space with me, which is incredible, and I've worked alongside Lindsay in the last few months. So yeah, I think this next generation coming through, it's a very collaborative feel. We all rise together. It's collaboration, not competition. There's another gallery that's fantastic. It's in Corona del Mar called Gallery Sonda. The owner, Josh McDonald, has become a dear friend. He's again in his late 30s. So again, I think we're all in it together. It's exciting. It's a roller coaster. But yeah, it's a very big honour to be considered a leader amongst, that network. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think Genevieve touched a little bit earlier already on this subject, but perhaps Lindsay has more insights about how do you see the world of social media contributing to your line of work, and how do you use it?
I would say similar to what Jen had mentioned, is that social media can be a wonderful tool for discovery. And it's sort of like you can just start on one track and then you kind of go down the rabbit hole and you see something you like, and similar to Pinterest, then it leads you to something else you like, and you can start to also see, when you're looking at artists on Instagram, who else is following this artist. So I sometimes use it as a tool to get a sense for reputation. So not just by numbers in terms of, okay, does this artist have 50,000 followers, 100,000, 10,000? I don't really use that as a marker indication for their success, but I am paying attention to, are there other people who I respect in the industry who are following this artist? Which galleries are following along? Which art advisors do I know in my field who are paying attention? So that's, two very different examples of how I think about social media. One, I am also using it for discovery, but I'm also using it sometimes as an indicator based on, who's following along. I will also say that for me in my line of work, I put a huge value on seeing artwork in person. I hope that the gallery model never goes away. I think it is really, really important and valuable, not just to the artists, but to consumers. And it's really important that they adapt, but also continue to exist. There's also been major shifts happening in terms of art fairs, and a lot of people have been concerned about Art Basel. Are they filling all the booths? I am going to those fairs, and I think those fairs are also important for me as an art advisor, where I'm sourcing from artists' studio directly. I'm going to galleries. I'm going to art fairs. That mode of discovery is important. And I often will see things online, and then I see it in person, and it is different. And I place a really big value on that in terms of my recommendations to clients, and feeling really good behind those when I can say, I've seen this work in person. I know the quality up close, and personal, I think that's hugely important. So while I'm happy social media is here, it certainly can't be the standalone mode of fine art.
And then I just wanted to say, in terms of that generational shift, I did forget to mention collectors, which are a big part of this scenario. So I think, I just wanted to touch on that and just say that, yes, we are at a transitional stage with collectors. I think the existing network of collectors that I have worked with, they have their walls filled. They've got their collection. They're no longer buying. So how do we now get in that next generation, that the 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, how do we get them into the galleries? I think art can be very intimidating. Coming into an art gallery can be very intimidating. So I know that's something Taylor and I are trying to do with this space, is to make it a very inviting, accessible, and open to conversation and curiosity. So that's part of the challenge for us is how do we get that next generation of collectors? And it's so encouraging and exciting to see a group like yourselves here on a Wednesday night, is it? And I don't think the younger generations are doing what you're doing. So I think that's definitely a challenge, is how do we engage them in the conversation?
And to follow up on that, I read somewhere that women have become very important collectors today. Do you see that in your experience? More than before?
Yes, I think women are becoming a powerhouse in terms of collecting and the arts, in terms of running spaces as well. I think throughout my career, that was something I noticed, was that you would think that the arts would be a very female-centric industry, that it would females kind of naturally gravitate towards the arts. But I noticed working in galleries and going to all of the fairs, all of the spaces were run by men. So that's changing, which is very exciting. And I think Taylor and I joke that our target demographic in this space is women in a very specific age bracket. So it's wonderful. I think we've seen a lot of women in their 40s who are actually getting divorced and then having like an entirely second life, and they're collecting art and living in their fabulous homes, and it's very exciting to see. And I think with my gallery, I recently sold a painting to a friend that I made through Mother's Group. She had never bought art before, but she fell in love with this one painting, and she made the leap. I took it over to her house and I installed it in her living room, and she was so excited. We popped a bottle of champagne. So it's really, to have that kind of experience is really exciting. And she's now hooked. I think she wants to buy a second one. So that's the beauty of art, is you have that emotional connection, and then when you start living with it, it's telling the story of your life. You have that memory with that work. You still love it. It changes. It stays the same, but it's really exciting to see that.
I just wanted to say something about the generational aspect, because I think you all are looking at us as the next generation, but we're here thinking about Gen Z, frankly, and that next generation. And I couldn't agree with you more that it's so important to get that generation involved in the art world, and from the sense of it being fun and like wanting to come and experience exhibitions and shows. And I really like the idea of finding creative ways to do that, which the two of you have been doing here in your space. I saw, there was a sound bath that took place in here. And I think that's really cool. And there's the next generation, they place a high value on experiences and experiential things. And even if they're not in here to, take something off the wall, if it's not within their income bracket yet, I think it's that it shouldn't be about the income bracket. It should be about experiencing art, whether that's going to museums or art galleries. And I think finding ways to kind of take away that intimidation factor and say, hey, come by for, grab a beer and like, let's get a DJ or just have fun, is so important. So I'm thinking that the three of us should put our heads together on some fun art experiences for the next gen. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that I think we've all felt, and I certainly have in coming here before, an enormously welcome and almost Zen-like space where there was just a warm, friendly openness where it doesn't feel cluttered. You feel calm as you walk in. You're recognized, but you're left alone to pursue, see what you want to see in your own time and space. So I definitely appreciate the openness that all of you bring to everything that you do, and are so grateful that you've given us the opportunity to be part of that. And we hope that everyone will support these guys going forward. But I wanted to make sure that we give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. So if anyone has a burning question, my sister.
You knew that was me.
I knew she.
I'm just really curious about the conversations and the process behind putting together a collection. I see a reclining figure there and a reclining figure over there, the photograph. And I wish I could be a fly on the wall when you're arranging an exhibition and thinking about what are some of the things that you think about in terms of placement and a theme.
So for me, again, the last couple of years, I was focused more heavily on curatorial work, and I feel like I've very much brought that eye into what I'm now doing here at the gallery. This is my third exhibition in the span of 4 months. I had a ceramic show in the annex space, which is over that way, and I had my inaugural show in the main space, and this is now my third exhibition. I am very curatorial about what I'm doing in terms of the shows. They typically run from about 8 to 12 weeks, and I think the first show honestly was pretty easy in terms of just going with my intuition and showing artists that I have loved for a very long time, and I think they naturally just kind of commingled together conceptually very easily. This show was actually a pretty big challenge for me. The idea of this show, it's called The Space Between First Light, Last Light. The idea of the show was actually sparked by a Peter Alexander lithograph, which is tucked behind that wall. It's a night view of the LA landscape from an aerial position. For me, that lithograph just really sparked this response I don't know, my dad was a pilot, so I travelled a lot growing up, and that feeling of being in an aeroplane where time is suspended and looking over, a city as it's sleeping, there was just something in that lithograph that really resonated with me. And just that idea of, again, I have a 3-year-old, there's a lot of times in the night where I'm awake or I'm walking the dog. So I spend a lot of time in that kind of liminal space, in those hours in between, and I think there's something really beautiful about that concept. So I really wanted to do a show around that idea, and so for this exhibition I ended up finding 10 artists who kind of were exploring that same concept. So behind me there are a couple of paintings by a Los Angeles artist named Brian Lotti. He was initially, in his earlier life, was a professional skateboarder, and he spent a lot of time in urban landscapes, particularly at night, and that inspired this series of paintings, which are night scenes. And this is actually his wife sleeping, which is really beautiful. But as you move through the show, again, there is the kind of cohesion, hopefully. I'm very thoughtful about placement of work, how works will look alongside each other, the conversation that they have between them, and then just the overall layout as well. You want it to be kind of an experience and a story unfolding as you move around the space. I think giving each work room to breathe is very important, not overhanging. Again, I guess there's a little bit of strategy, not only am I trying to be curatorial, but I'm also a commercial gallery. So again, I'm trying to be a little strategic in terms of having that mix of established and emerging artists, giving people different price points, bringing different types of work, whether it's sculpture, photography, or painting. So there's a lot of lot of detail that goes into it, not to mention the logistics. I mean, working with 11 artists for that first show, now working with 10 artists for this show, there's a lot of wrangling, a lot of shipping, a lot of communication, consignment agreements. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be able to do this. I keep joking that Taylor has the far better business model because I'm switching out shows every 8 to 10 or 12 weeks, whereas Taylor's got this beautiful collection that, you know, just is existing and looks incredible. So I think she probably sees me in the throes of trying to plan shows and putting the shows on. As a gallerist, I do think we do it all. You're the jack of all trades. So this morning I was in my Lululemon leggings and I was wrapping paintings and taking them to storage, and now I'm sitting here in my little feather jacket. So, you know, it's all part of the fun. Hopefully that answered the question. Yeah.
Anybody?
Thank you. Could you ladies describe for me the difference between decorative art and fine art? Because I know nothing about art.
I think there would probably be a few different ways that people would define it, and I wouldn't say that there's necessarily one size fits all in terms of that definition. But I mean, I think one thing, you know, when I think about decorative art, it might be reproductions or people trying to create some, you know, follow a trend or something that they've seen somewhere else and then recreate it. I put that a little bit more into the category of larger department stores like Restoration Hardware. I think that fine art, you know, you'd experience in a space like this in a gallery. I would also say that fine art are true career artists. And when I say career artist, I just mean that there's nothing else they can, not that nothing else that they can do, but like they so deeply in their soul and being were meant to be artists. So they spend a lot of time and thought and energy into creation in terms of experimenting and iterating. Also, so I think that's a couple pieces. I think one thing that I really like when I'm looking at an artist and evaluating them is it's almost like a good band that you really like. When they come out with a new album, you want to know that it's them, but you also want it to be a little bit different, and you don't want it to stray so far from what they were doing before. So I like when an artist with their next release in terms of a body of work, I'm like, oh, I know I'll just use Heather Day as an example because she's an artist that I love. I know it's Heather's work, but it's a little bit different than what I saw before. I think it also takes being a good editor. So you're iterating, you're reinventing, but you're still you're experimenting with materials versus sort of the same run of show. That's my kind of insight. I'll let you.
I was going to say, you can probably give some interesting insight as well about the role of an art advisor versus an interior designer, because I think those two things have become very blended in the most recent years. I think that was something I was surprised about in starting this gallery, is how people are kind of moving away from advisors and they're just letting their designer choose their art based on what the aesthetic is of the design. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's the other piece. I think designers are often more focused on art pieces that might fit in or look good with the couch and the drapes, and it's a little bit of a different look and feel, and it also comes down to time. So as an advisor, my lane, the only thing that I'm doing is evaluating, sourcing, art discovery, and it's frankly very, very time consuming. There's a reason that the job exists, but when you're working across interior design, you are juggling so many things all at once and kind of going to, I often find that designers will be like, oh, I'm looking at Tappen or Uprise or the same types of sources. But as an advisor, there's a lot of research that goes into recommendations, like we had talked about, like where is the artist showing? What is the story behind the piece? And my recommendations are really rooted more in background of the artist, how the work was made, what are the elements that went into this artwork, and how does it make you feel first and foremost. And we're also going to make sure it looks incredible in the intended space. But it's more rooted in storytelling, and I don't send clients art pieces without verbal context. So designers might say, hey, what do you think? Like, here's 10 options, but without the context, there's not a lot of meaning. So I think fine art has a lot more context, and decorative art, it's a little bit harder to dive deep into the storytelling piece.
Just in the interest of time, because we do want to give you a chance to go through the galleries, I think we'll take one last question. Does that sound fair? Is that okay with you guys? Okay. Karen.
I'm embarrassed to be last. Our home of 40 years, I'm sitting here thinking, we have art on the walls. And I'm wondering what an advisor would think if they came into our house. And what it says about us and whether that matters or not. I'm a longtime museum docent. I know nothing about art, but I became fascinated by the process of putting people together, researching a lot, and I find myself drawn to the history. The history of the world and of humanity. If I have a 45-minute period, which pieces can I show that will tell a story about humanity? That's what I do. But I'm fascinated by the mushroom. And I'm thinking, I haven't been to Albania, I've been close. If I were interested in a piece like that, where would I put it? What would it mean? Because the art that we have now, I'm thinking we have a piece from my husband's time in Vietnam, your buddy's son, and Doug named the son after you. So, okay, this is Don Jr., and what's it about? It's a deer. And the deer is confined in I don't know what it means. It's above our dining room table. It's been there for years. I don't look at it much. Industrial forest. Industrial forest. There we go. I'm learning something. And we have another piece that the kids gave us that's above his piano. And I believe it's the Berkeley Hills looking down at he went to Cal, okay. And so in other words, they're meaningful pieces to us. I don't think they say we don't entertain a lot. I don't know what might say to people who come. I find when I go to other people's houses for a party, I almost never look at their art. I'm there to talk to the people, maybe to have a few nibbles, And so what would an advisor suggest? I mean, doesn't this suggest I'm not interested in art? Because I don't want to show it off to people. I don't like clothes, so in a way I'm not showing something with my clothes to you, but I'm very interested in teaching you history because I was a high school teacher and I'm pedantic. So what would an advisor do? I mean, are there other people like us that just have a few pieces up there and they've been there for 40 years? But I love that mushroom.
No, I truly, everything that you just said is music to my ears, because the thing that matters in an art collection is that it tells your story. What does it say? What does it say about you? You just, shared that with, I think, this audience that you're interested in history and that you were a teacher and that the pieces that you have in your home have meaning to you. And I think that's sort of hopefully back to the question of decorative versus, personal art, maybe not even fine art, but that it tells a story, and art should really tell a story, and that's what Taylor is doing through her photography that she explained so eloquently, is that it tells a story. So I think also in any good design, there's a mix. There's a mix of not everything needs to be high end or really expensive, but I think that balance is so important, and is what makes a space interesting. I really appreciate that Genevieve has brought in such a balance of these iconic, really impactful artists, but then she also has accessible emerging art in a space, and I really appreciate that as a consumer of art, as a collector, as an advisor. The way that I advise my clients is that there should be a mix in your collection. Like, let's talk about emerging artists who haven't yet hit the mainstream or popped in. Their price points are really accessible, and then let's go for something in more of the mid-career format, and let's really focus on someone who's established, because I think that keeps things interesting, and that you should always first and foremost buy what you love, like what you connect with, not what other people are going to think about it, because that's what makes people interesting, right? Like, you don't need someone to come over and ask you about the art on your walls. You might tell them, hey, this was a place I visited or that felt nostalgic to me, and that's where like my pure love and passion for this industry comes from, is taking away the prestige and the, for lack of a better word, like the snootiness, and just getting to the root of emotional connection and storytelling.
I just wanted to second Lindsay's point. That is always my number one piece of advice, is only ever buy what you love and what you have a connection with. I would never advise someone to buy a piece of art because of the prestige, or because the artist is trending, or there's potentially some monetary value in reselling down the track. I think always buying what you love, and then being able to live with it as well, having it on your wall and seeing it every day. I think for me, in my own house, I have a mix of original works. I have a framed print. It's a map that my sister gave to me as a gift when I moved here from Australia 10 years ago. And there's no worth in it. It's not a high-value artwork, but she wrote a little inscription on the back just saying, "Remember, you always have another home to come home to," something like that. So, I don't think it has to be an original Picasso hanging on your wall. I mean, you've already mentioned a couple of artworks, and they each have stories, and that's what it's all about. I mean, you mentioned the deer painting. I want to know more. So that's part of your story. That's a really beautiful thing, and that's the joy of art.
Well, we would like to thank you all for coming, but particularly we would like to thank Genevieve, Lindsay, and Taylor for taking the time to talk to us tonight. So a big round of applause for all of you. We would also like to mention something that it wasn't said, but that Lindsay has a gallery in Costa Mesa, so she doesn't share the space here with Genevieve and Taylor. So after you see this space tonight, perhaps you can venture down to Lindsay's space in the near future. Thank you very much. And we have wine and appetizers.